Forest a disservice. Let's say good morning to two fans. One a dyed-in-the-wool Forest fan. We've spoken to both these guys before. Good morning to Dan Watts from Talk Forest TV on the YouTube, and also to David Comerford from Reds Unrestricted, the podcast co-host. And, of course, Liverpool beat my side, West Ham, in the week. So we won't be hearing a lot from you, David, this morning. I'm joking, of course, guys. How are you doing, guys? Both well, I hope.
Morning, Paul. Apologies on behalf of Liverpool as well.
Let's start with you, Dan, if we may, as a Forest fan. Now, the fact you got promotion was amazing. 23-odd years in the wilderness or in the Championship and lower even in some cases. But it's been a difficult start, to say the least. Steven Gerrard went yesterday. Do you think your man's going to survive if he loses a couple more before the World Cup?
Yeah, I think he'll stay. Don't get me wrong, what Cooper did last season with how he was, it was just an unreal job, like. And I think this season, I know we've been criticised quite a lot for signing all these players, but we needed to do it just because of, like, we had so many loan signings from last season. Cooper had around 15 players that was good enough, so you needed to get rid of a lot of that board. And to bring in all these players, we needed to do it, and we expected a tough start. Say you had like Spurs, West Ham, Man City. So we expected it, but I do think Cooper's the man to stay, and I don't get me wrong, I think just let him build from top to bottom, because we've not had this stability for quite a few years now.
Although, to be honest, Dan, I mean, when you say get rid of dead wood, a lot of your players that got you promotion were on loan, and also I'm very touched and grateful that you call West Ham tough opposition, when, of course, David Comerford from the Reds Unrestricted podcast knows that maybe isn't always the case, David. So you had, and again, people have such expectations of Liverpool. Klopp is such an amazing manager, one of the I think one of the few geniuses in football in my memory, and Guardiola's up there with him, of course, the King Kong and Godzilla of our modern footballing times. So a disappointing start in some ways. Is it coming good for you now, do you think?
I think it is. Obviously, we saw a few weeks ago Klopp change the system for the game against Rangers. Since then, Liverpool have won 4 out of 5. I still don't see Liverpool necessarily being in the conversation for the title, but certainly now I'm a lot more optimistic about what the season might hold, because I think it was a necessary change, and it's one that appears to be working pretty well on the whole.
And I'm not saying this to be a kind of creep around you, but I held the torch aloft. I said Liverpool are definitely going to be a top 4 contender, serious contenders. I'll be amazed if you don't end up with top 4. But what's the feeling be like from the fans you've spoken to? We're talking to David Comerford here, Reds Unrestricted podcast co-host. I mean, did people begin to lose faith in Klopp for a while?
I don't think there was ever any question of that, to be honest. I think most Liverpool fans you speak to would actually rather almost clear out the whole playing squad before they even looked at the manager, such as the loyalty and devotion they feel towards him. I just think that there was a degree of patience there with players like Nunez coming in and the system changing. But we are very glad that he saw maybe the error of his ways in some respects and changed the system around.
And let's go back there to our pal from Nottingham Forest, of course, from the Talk Forest TV YouTube channel. Dan Watts. Dan, it's at home tomorrow, your game, 12:30 kick-off. Well, that makes a difference, surely, because actually some of your performances are far better in front of the home crowd.
Oh, it will be, because our home crowd is the 12th man, and especially throughout the games this season, and that when we get behind the team, it actually up their games. So I think it will be a massive great forward.
I mean, there's nothing like that. And certainly the Nottingham Forest fans have been fantastic through the wilderness years, and now they're back with a bang. I mean, does it worry you? Let's go back to David Comerford now from the Reds Unlimited podcast. Reds Unrestricted, I do apologise. Does it worry you that I think I'm right in saying that of your last 6 away games, you've only won 1?
Yeah, the away record has been absolutely dreadful this season, to be honest.
You have conceded a lot of goals first as well, which is very, very unusual for Klopp.
Yeah, there was a stat recently, I think, of Liverpool having one of the worst first half records in the whole of the Premier League. Thankfully, the past couple of games we have managed to get the first goal, and you've seen obviously the difference that's made with the final result, I suppose.
And of course, you managed to urinate quite copiously upon the chips of Nottingham Forest last season in the FA Cup quarter-final, when it could have been their glorious season, and you stopped them going on to win the FA Cup and getting promotion back to the Premier League.
Yeah, I remember how intense and difficult a game that was, even though Forest are obviously we're in the Championship at that point, but maybe that's a sign of almost what's to come on Saturday in terms of the intensity of the atmosphere. So we'll have to be braced for that, definitely.
No, I mentioned John Jackson. He's been on the show earlier. He's my co-presenter this morning, my producer. He's a Nottingham Forest fan, Dan. So you're not alone there. You've got company on the show this morning. I did want to ask John a question or two. But before we get to that, Dan, let me ask you a question. I mean, have you now come down to the bare bones of the fact that success for Nottingham Forest this season would just be survival in the Premier League? It's a rather depressing thought, isn't it?
Not really. I think I'll be happy if we stay up to a fair, because I think that's what we sort of expected, if we're being honest, Rio. And I think if we do stay up, it'd be a massive achievement to see the summer we had.
Well, that's the thing, I suppose, as well. There's also that whole sense of, history doesn't mean much. It's the here and now. And while Nottingham Forest have got that amazing past, they're dealing with a very different top tier to the one that they last left. It was all those years ago. Going back to David Comerford, now, you've talked a bit about your expectations and your, optimism about Liverpool going forward. I think you're right. I don't think a title challenge is on the cards. What do you make of the, as a not a neutral, as somebody who hates both teams, I'm sure dislikes them both. What do you make of the resurgence of Tottenham, but also particularly Spurs this season?
Yeah. Spurs are an interesting one, I think, because obviously, doing much better than Liverpool in the Premier League, but I do wonder about their sort of longevity in that top four battle. I was thinking yesterday, I expect Arsenal and City to be in there. I probably expect Chelsea to be in there. If there's one team I feel Liverpool can kind of overhaul at the moment and get into the top four, it would be Spurs, because I just think that they are a bit shaky and it feels like a little bit stale potentially, so I'm not sure how long they're going to last potentially at that top end of the league.
Okay, Jamie O'Hara, I'll give Jamie your number. He'll phone you up after the show and you can have a nice old chat. I'm joking, of course. Let's introduce John Jackson to you guys, the listeners, and to Dan and David. John, a few injury niggles and worries. You're at the game earlier this week, though, of course, Nottingham Forest. What do you make of the team overall? What's going wrong and what's going right, would you say, John?
Yeah, Dan, were you at the game on Tuesday?
I weren't. I was watching it on TV.
Okay. Well, I don't know if you'll disagree, but the first half was fairly diabolical. I'm pretty sure I was expecting an absolute battering at the hands of Brighton, but I think the second half showed a lot more promise, and I feel like we got our stuff together. I feel like it's a tricky one, as you mentioned. Forest have signed so many players. To get them all playing well together is quite hard. And I've said before that I'm a bit baffled as to why they wouldn't play Harry Toffolo and Lewis O'Brien together. They know each other so well from playing at Huddersfield, in the first few games. In fact, the game, which I'm sure you were at, Dan, which was the West Ham win, which we don't remind Paul about, but the Forest only win at the City.
And that's all we've got time for. Thank you very much for joining. I'm joking, of course.
They played quite well today, and I think it's unlucky that Harry Toffolo was sort of dropped when we signed a left-back from Atletico Madrid, but, I know he's come in and he got injured in that game, which is a little bit frustrating.
It also reminded me, of course, once again, that Dan bigged up Nottingham Forest at the expense of a very, very, very mediocre West Ham, but we're one of the big teams in his world.
Oh, yeah, West Ham were rubbish. West Ham were rubbish. And the thing for me is that, we were watching Brighton and we were just Brighton had so much time on the ball, and it's kind of unacceptable because they were allowed to do whatever they wanted, whereas whenever Forest had the ball, it looked like an instant panic straight away. And, not to get into the tactics too much, but, they're playing out from the back with the two centre-backs, and I don't think Steve Cook and McKenna necessarily have the greatest sort of passing range, so you kind of needed Freuler to come back, and he didn't do that in the first half. But then in the second half, they kind of started doing the old split centre-backs where, that defensive midfielder who...
We'll talk Liverpool in a moment, David. Thank you for your patience with this nonsense.
I was just going to say, it's almost like there were signs of them realising it wasn't working, whereas in the past they've just stuck to their guns and carried on, and it's not worked. I have to say with David, I think, David, you're not going to have as tough a game as you did in the FA Cup, because that was a team that were buoyed by their ongoing success, and there was a lot of people proving themselves. And I think coming down tomorrow is going to be a little bit different, because it's not the same team that's absolutely buzzing. It's that team that looks nervous. So I'm not particularly confident.
Let me leave it very quickly for David. We got the news, breaking news. I heard it driving in on the sports bar last night. Steven Gerrard gone with immediate effect. That was yesterday from Aston Villa. Brendan Rodgers paid a very moving tribute to him, I think, after Leicester's win, against Leeds, and he was saying, what a lovely fellow he is. How will this play, do you think, with Liverpool fans? Because there's always been this notion, maybe amongst just commentators like me, but this notion that somehow he was the heir apparent eventually, would end up at Liverpool, providing the managerial career continued on an upward trajectory. What do you think of him now?
Well, we definitely saw the job at Aston Villa as almost an audition for Liverpool. I think obviously Liverpool fans will be pretty gutted on the whole to see how it has panned out for him, but also accepting that he maybe at this stage it is out of his depth, sadly, at this level. And I just think my overall impression was that every time I watched him, I couldn't really see a defined style of football, and you're not really going to last that long if you don't have that, I suppose.
I mean, the curious thing for me was there was talk early on of him, falling out with or alienating or not getting along with a couple of the players, and yet I always regarded him at Liverpool as a kind of a conciliatory figure, not a pushover, but somebody who was much more a team builder, a team bonder, than a divisive figure like the San Mourinho style of management.
Yeah, I'd agree with that in the sense that it always felt like he could put sort of United dressing room behind him. I suppose during his time at Liverpool, never really felt like he did that to the extent that he needed to at Villa, and obviously with the pool of players that he has, then you'd expect them a lot more. I think he has said himself that they should be pushing for like top 7.
Yeah.
So by that measure, it's kind of failed quite miserably, I'd have to say.
And if Steve Cooper does get the old tin tack, the sack, his P45, Dan, would you take Steven Gerrard, or would you rather have, say, Sean Dyche or Coutinho? Here, there's one for you, Pochettino.
I'll be honest, it's I wouldn't take. I'd probably take Sean Dyche, but just because he's a Nottingham lad, if being honest with you. But I'm happy with Steve Cooper. I mean, if he get given his P45, he'd be like tomorrow down at City Grad.
So let me get a prediction for both of you guys. You're allowed a couple, one from your heart, one from your head. Let's start with you, David, if we may. So, how do you think it's going to play out tomorrow? 12:30 kickoff, live and exclusive on TalkSport. What do you reckon? What's the score going to be?
Heart would say 3-0. Head would say a tighter 2-1, especially with Forest looking a bit more solid defensively. Okay,
and a very gentlemanly acknowledgement of sometimes your slightly, should we say, defensive vulnerabilities. Dan, a prediction from you, matey, please, tomorrow. Or 2, if you like.
I think Heart, I would love to see probably a 2-1 win or 1-0 win Forest. I mean, I know I was going to say it because with it being my heart, but I think if it's anything like it was last season's game, I think Liverpool might just nick it with like a 1-0 or 2-1.
So Liverpool might nick it, then whatever the is. Dan, we love your optimism. You're a top man. Thank you very much for joining us. And to David, final prediction from you, John Jackson.
Do you want the honest one?
I want the honest one from you, yeah. I mean, be a first, to be honest with me. I'm joking, of course, again.
I feel like Liverpool will probably score 2 goals. Forest will continue to try and keep it down, and then Liverpool will just probably make some subs and it might end 3-0.
Okie dokie, we'll see how things go there. Dan, once again, thank you for joining us. Dan Watts there from the Talk Forest TV YouTube channel, and also David Comerford. Great listen, David. Reds Unrestricted podcast co-host. Talking to me, Paul Ross and John Jackson live on Talk Sports, where we're live till 5.
There are lots of things that 5 horse